Hello there, and thank you for keeping it Lolo TV. You are just on time to catch your special interview segment on this day. My name is Eddie Nyadwa. Well, on today's episode program, we are going to get sporty, and we have a special guest, that is Mr. Eliud Owalo. Mr. Owalo describes himself as an astute professional who is also visionary, and the gentleman possesses close to 2 decades of experience as a professional management consultant. Mr. Owalo,
Yes.
thank you for joining us and welcome to Lolo TV.
Thank you very much too.
First things first,
Yes.
since we're going to get sporty,
Yes.
the UEFA Champions League final was played. Bayern took the day.
Yes.
Which team are you supporting?
I was supporting Bayern.
So you, after the
I
match,
was
you're
home and
smiling.
dry. I was home and dry, yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
We're also battling Corona pandemic.
Yes.
How has it been on your end?
Well, it's been a challenge because first of all, it is a tragedy that is unprecedented. We have never witnessed something of epochal dimensions as what we have witnessed this time round, perhaps in our lifetime. A situation where almost everything comes to a standstill. So it has negatively impacted on all facets of our life, social, economical, political, and of course it has adversely affected our sports.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of the effects on sports, now that we want to get sporty with you,
Yes.
how much impact has it caused in the sporting fraternity, globally and also here locally?
You see, sports is a universal game. And Corona itself also has impacted all facets of life globally. So Kenya is not an exception. But specifically with respect to our country, you realize that the environment in which our athletes or sportsmen operate today is different from what perhaps was there a decade or 2 decades ago. Today we have got sportsmen who fully and wholly rely on sports as a source of livelihood. So the moment sports gets to a standstill, it means they lose their source of livelihood. So to that effect, it has negatively impacted not just the sportsmen themselves, but also their families and dependents, because these sportsmen have got many dependents. At individual levels.
Speaking of affecting livelihoods, we know sports activities support coaches and also the players themselves.
Yes.
And a few months back, you made a compassionate appeal to the national government to rescue Kenya's sportsmen and women.
Yes.
So
actually,
far,
I was worried. I was worried because everybody was talking about artists. People were talking about employees in the private sector. People were talking about employees in the public sector. But nobody was talking about sports. So I came out and appealed to the Ministry of Sports, our parent Ministry of Sports, to put in place a framework that could actually facilitate some remedial measures as a means of cushioning the sportsmen and women during this period of COVID. And I'm happy to note that based on that appeal, or informed by that appeal, there was actually some positive response from the Ministry of Sports. Yeah, they came up with some package that gave out about 10,000 shillings per player or per athlete over a period of 3 months.
Okay.
That in itself was a fundamental contribution, considering that resources have been quite scarce during this period of COVID.
Okay.
Yeah.
Despite the compassionate appeal that you made to the government,
Yes.
your philanthropy towards towards sports activities has not gone unnoticed.
Yeah.
You donated some handsome amount to the Kenya Lioness and team.
Yeah.
And also previously you've done the same for football teams,
Yes.
AFC and Gor Mahia.
Yes, please.
How?
It's based on my passion for sports. You know, I'm an ardent sports follower. Yeah, and I've also been a sports person myself. I've played basketball during my university days. I played basketball both for the Kenyatta University Pirates team and also for Barclays Bank Eagles. And I know what sportsmen go through. So I have a lot of passion for sports. So I was pained by the fact that nobody seemed to be addressing the issue of sportsmen. So they were actually vulnerable. And our social media platform was awash with examples of how some of our sportsmen or athletes have now resorted to alternative means of livelihood. You find some doing boda boda, yeah, You find some doing carpentry. So I was pained because there's no game being played. Yeah, they don't have a source of livelihood. They are clubs which ordinarily rely on revenue from, for example, in football, rely on revenue from the gate collections, the non-institutional clubs. When there's no game being played, then it means the source of revenue dries up. Yeah. So we were in a catch-22 situation where the players themselves cannot get salaries, yeah, or emoluments from their employers, which are the clubs. And the clubs, on the other hand, were also fully stretched because most sponsors had withdrawn from sports, for example, in football. Yeah. So the clubs themselves also did not have any source of money. So I thought that it is imperative to come in a little way and see how to support these players to some extent. Oh. That's why I came in. Actually, I came in as an agent of necessity. Yeah, to fill that void.
Indeed very timely for
Yes,
them.
Yeah, to fill that void, yeah.
Now, Mr. Owalo,
yeah,
there appears to be some ray of hope for sporting activities to resume in the country.
Yes.
After the CS for Sports, Honorable Hamina Mohammed, announced some proposed guidelines and protocols for resumption of sporting activities.
Yes.
I'm certain we've gone through some of the guidelines.
Yes.
Do you agree with this step?
It's a step in the right direction because, again, sports activities have resumed elsewhere. Yeah, of course, within the confines of some regulatory or framework or some guidelines, yeah, based on the COVID effects, yeah. So Kenya cannot be an isolation. We must also progressively work towards the resumption of sports. So it's a step in the right direction, and it could not have come at a better time because we have got teams which are on the verge of taking part in international events. Let's take Harambee Stars, for example. They are soon going to, starting October, they'll be starting their preliminary Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers. I think they have got a home and away game against Cape Verde.
Exactly.
In basketball, for example, the Kenya national basketball team, the Morans, are supposed to take part in the Africa Basketball Championship, which is slated for November. So they need really to start the preparations as early as yesterday. In hockey, for example, we have got teams which are supposed to take part in international tournament. Kenya itself is supposed to host the African Athletics Championship, I think in October, okay? So look, against that background, the players and the athletes need to start preparations early enough. So we need to resume the sports, yeah? Of course, not in a vacuum, but within the ambit of some framework that will ensure that the safety of the players and the athletes is also guaranteed against the background of COVID-19.
Okay. Now, speaking of these international competitions that are yet to be staged towards the end of this year, that is including the Morans who are going for their competitions, and also you know the countries preparing to host the World Athletic Continental Gold Tour.
Yes.
Do you think if we host such sporting tournaments, it can provide the necessary impetus for us to now jumpstart economy recovery post-COVID?
You know, it pains me because sports is one area that has never been given due attention in this country. Starting all the way from planning and going all the way to the budgetary processes. If you look at our budgetary framework, you find that sports is one of the functions or activities, or thematic areas that usually attracts the least amount of resources. Sports is seen as an extracurricular activity. It's not seen as a core activity within our planning framework. And I think that's where we get it wrong. Because sports in itself, if well harnessed, nurtured and managed, can be a fundamental source of revenue for this country, even foreign exchange, if we manage our sports well. So I think it is an area where we really need to have a paradigm shift in our thinking so that sports get the attention that it deserves. Other than employment, for example, today the youth, our youth, constitute about 75% of our national population based on the 2019 census. And most of them are gainfully engaged in sports or employed in sports. So we are actually talking about a whole generation, a substantial proportion of Kenyans who are actually earning their living out of sports. That is one. And two, we can also use sports as a means of livelihood and foreign exchange earnings, getting foreign exchange earnings for the country. We can also use sports as a means of managing our social fabric so that the youth keep gainfully engaged in productive activity, as opposed to having too much time in their hands that will enable them get into social vices like drug and substance abuse. So we need to look at sports from a much bigger helicopter version, as opposed to the narrow and parochial thinking where we are looking at sports as an extracurricular activity that perhaps should only attract the resources, surplus resources, if I may use that word.
Speaking of sports as an extracurricular activities,
Yeah.
I remember when I was still in primary school,
Yeah.
we used to have these lessons called PE,
Yes.
physical exercises,
Yes.
up to the secondary level.
Yes.
However, we find that there are some teachers who are notorious.
Yeah.
When they see you have a PE lesson,
Yeah.
that's when they come and they want to now cover the syllabus,
Yes.
instead of you going to engage in physical activity and exercise.
Because they were not giving sports due attention. Yeah. You see, talent development must start from an early age. Yeah. This is where we go wrong as a country, because we wait until it is too late. Yeah. That's when now we want to identify talent. We must identify talent early enough and nurture it progressively. Yeah, where the West beats us is that they start nurturing their talents from quite an early age. Now, the net effect is that when you start nurturing talent so late in the day, then you may be thinking that you are producing the best, but your best is not good enough to compete with the rest in the world. That's why at times we end up, even in Africa Cup of Nations, in soccer, for example, you find that we are not able, we don't have a competitive edge or a comparative advantage in comparison to other countries who give their sports due attention from tender age when students are still in school. Okay. So we need to nurture our talents from very early.
The government has put in some effort,
Yeah.
and now they are constructing the Kenya Academy on Sports.
Yes.
However, it's at a very snail pace. Can it be done much faster?
First of all, it's a step in the right direction that the government has thought of doing this. But again, when you have a sports academy, yeah, the idea is there, but the implementation framework must be right. We need to decentralize the activities of these academies to the lowest level, so that we have the sports development activities at the grassroots. Yeah, perhaps we could start at county level. We need to have an academy at the level of each and every country. Then we go down to the constituencies. We cannot start identifying talent at the national level. It must start from the grassroots level, then it builds up to the national level. That is when progressively we will be able to attain the expected targets as far as sports development is concerned.
Politicians are very notorious for staging sporting activities and tournaments when they campaign.
Yeah.
And you find during these tournaments, very many talents are identified.
Yeah.
But we lack scouts
to
come and pick these talents and nurture them.
Yeah. You see, we get our priorities wrong as a country. Why should we wait for politicians to help us, to sponsor tournaments and help us identify the talents? Yeah, I think it's a question of misplaced priorities, because politicians, more often than not, capitalize on sports tournaments to pursue their own
advance the agenda.
Yeah, personal, egocentric agenda. And once that is achieved, they forget about the sports initiatives altogether. So we need to develop our sports, or pursue our sports agenda away from the politics. I'm not saying that politics does not inform sports, but we should not rely on politics to develop sports. Yeah.
Now, speaking of reliance on politicians to develop sports, back in 2013, the regime that got into power had promised Kenyans 5 state-of-the-art stadiums. 8 years later, not even one state-of-the-art stadium has been developed. How should we change this paradigm so that we keep sports devoid from politicians and have now stakeholders themselves driving the agenda of sports development?
You see, it's a question of the people we get into leadership positions. Okay, first of all, there needs to be commitment to a given cause. Our leaders make promises which more often than not they know are not attainable, are not realistic, and yet they don't expect to be held to account on the basis of the same. We need to have a culture and attitudinal change process in the mindset of Kenyans, so that we elect good people to leadership positions. People from their past professional backgrounds or functional domains. For example, in football, why should we have people coming into football, leadership positions, so that they use it as a launch pad for going into politics? We have got retired footballers in this country who have got a passion for the game and who understand the game and qualified enough to run affairs of football. So if you ask me, the starting point is that we elect wrong people to good positions. If you elect wrong people to good positions, then garbage in, garbage out. You don't expect anything positive.
Garbage in, garbage out, as you say. You're a well-versed strategic consultant.
Yeah.
And you've done many papers
Yeah.
for either ministries,
Yeah.
state agencies, state authorities,
Yeah.
and you've achieved results, I must say.
Yeah.
Now, for the sporting fraternity, there is the Sporting Act.
Yeah.
What
There's also
promise,
sports policy.
sports policing.
Yes.
What promise does it have in heralding sports in the country?
It's a good idea that we have a sports policy, but perhaps we don't know how to use the sports policy. You can have a policy in place, but implementation of the policy is zero. All our sporting planning frameworks needs to be aligned to that policy, because now the macro level policy framework is what should inform the sporting agenda in the country. So based on that sports policy, the Ministry of Sports must then now have its own strategic plan aligned to that policy, because we must have plans to facilitate implementation of the policy, or else the policy remains a shell, a document that will gather dust in the shelves. Once the ministry does that, have in place a comprehensive strategic plan with an appropriate implementation framework, monitoring and evaluation framework aligned to that that policy framework, then the individual sporting federations, starting with FKF, for example, Kenya Basketball Federation, the Hockey Federation, the Athletics Kenya, need to develop their plans aligned to the ministerial strategic plan and by extension the sports policies. So we are getting to a level where now we are cascading implementation of the policy downwards. So we must have a framework for implementing the policy. And we need to know, again, that sport is a multifaceted issue. There are so many stakeholders involved in sport. The sports policy itself, I'm not privy to the process that led to the development of the policy, but from where I sit, I would have preferred a situation where in the development of that policy, we brought stakeholders on board from the very beginning so that their views and ideas go into that policy, so that ownership of the final document lies with them or rests with the integral sports stakeholder segments to facilitate ease of implementation. So our planning framework, policy framework must be participatory. Identification of the integral stakeholders involved is a fundamental step at the very beginning, so that their views and ideas go into that planning framework, so that ownership of the final product lies with them to facilitate ease of implementation.
Okay. Yeah. Now let's talk about infrastructure required for development of sports in the country.
Yes.
We have many sporting activities.
Yes.
However, when you mention Kenya in the global stage, you'll hear them talking about our athletes.
Yes.
But we also have the rugby team that at once upon a time was doing very well,
extremely well. Yeah.
But you come back home, they barely have good infrastructure for themselves.
Yes. That should be an area of focus in our sports development. It's actually a thematic area in our sports development. We must have the facilities. If we don't have...
Now let's talk about infrastructure required for development of sports in the country.
Yes.
We have many sporting activities.
Yes.
However, when you mention Kenya in the global stage, you'll hear them talking about our athletes.
Yes.
But we also have the rugby team that at once upon a time was doing very
well, extremely well. Yeah.
But you come back home, they barely have good infrastructure for themselves.
Yes. That should be an area of focus in our sports development. To find that they don't have adequate time to acclimatize with those situations even when they get out there because of inadequacy in resources. They can only travel perhaps 2 to 3 days prior to a match. So our sports infrastructure must be adequately developed and must be benchmarked with best practices elsewhere. We cannot develop our sport in a vacuum. We must benchmark with what's happening elsewhere. okay? If we are to keep abreast with latest development in sports, and if we are to nurture and develop our sports as required.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, as we come to a close of the interview,
Yes.
sporting activities attract huge crowds,
Yes.
also funding and sponsors.
Yes.
But find that many sports teams in the country
Yeah.
lack the sponsors. Is it because of the management of the teams, or is it because of the federation that manage the sports?
We have two problems, if you ask me. One, a leadership deficit. Yeah? A leadership deficit. We elect wrong people to these positions. The process of electing leaders in our sporting associations is in itself flawed. Yeah? So you end up with wrong people in positions, okay? Now, that leadership deficit, therefore, has got a negative impact on the way these organizations and even sports teams are going to be what? To be managed. So our problem is twofold: leadership and governance. Okay? We don't have an enabling governance framework that can facilitate good governance. Yeah? Once you have wrong leadership at the top, and then within a sports entity or a sports institution, again, you don't have the right structures. Yeah, you don't have the right performance management framework. Yeah, taking note of reward management for the players and so on and so forth. Yeah, you don't have checks and balances in terms of utilization of funds that you receive. Yeah, the net effect is that you will have poor corporate image, poor image. Yeah. With poor image, no sponsor will want to associate with you, because sponsors want, it's actually not, I don't want to use the word sponsorship. I want to use the phrase corporate social investment. The private sector engages in corporate social investment because they expect some return, yeah, from whatever resources they put into football.
So it's supposed to be a mutual relationship.
Or athletics or basketball, for example. So it has to be a mutually beneficial arrangement where the private sector puts its money in the game, and by return, based on perhaps the fan base of sports, yeah, they also get some visibility for their products. Okay? But if there is no prudent management of resources and there's a deficit in leadership, no sponsor will put its money in football or in athletics or in basketball or even in rugby. So we have two problems: leadership and poor governance. Unless those two issues are addressed, believe you me, we not have any big money getting into sports.
Now, lastly,
Yeah.
Mr. Owalo,
Yeah.
for the sportsmen and women watching this,
Yes.
is there hope for them?
There is hope. Yeah, there is hope. First of all, I'm happy that most of our sportsmen and women are very committed, extremely committed. That is already a step in the right direction, commitment to the cause. Now, I believe that all is not lost. Yeah, if we can have a paradigm shift in the way we manage sports, yeah, so that we have got a framework that would facilitate good governance in sports, yeah, then the private sector will come in with the money. We will be able to turn sports into an industry that can attract resources. And then we think of the reward management framework. Yeah? How then do we reward the players? Yeah? How do we reward our athletes? Eh? How do we prepare for retirement of the athletes? You know, it's actually a vicious chain of planning issues that need to be put into the correct context. Yeah? Context. Yeah? So I believe that we as a country are on the right track by virtue of the fact that we are recognizing that there is some problem that needs to be addressed. Okay? So I appeal to sports fans, yeah, to change their mindset so that, one, they elect the correct people into leadership positions in sports and insist on accountability. Yeah? Ensure that we have got systems, policies, and operational procedures within our sports institution and our sports clubs that will facilitate good governance. Yeah? We must have structures with clear functional mandates aligned to the overall goals of these clubs. Okay? We must have comprehensive performance management frameworks for the clubs. We must have effective monitoring, evaluation, and reporting framework, so that we have got accountability, yeah, with clear responsibility centers, so that people, based on their functional domains within these clubs or institutions, are held accountable for performance. We must have clear targets, yeah, clear expected outputs and outcomes so that we have got some accountability framework. We cannot develop sports in a vacuum. We must have an appropriate planning framework aligned to the policy, and then an implementation framework that entails proper performance management and also effective monitoring, evaluation and reporting.
Lastly, before I let you leave,
Yeah.
politicians
Yeah.
who have served in the National Assembly
Yes.
get pension
Yes.
that Kenyans say is quite handsome.
Yes. Yes.
But sportsmen and women who have brought silver, gold and bronze for this country,
Yeah.
some of them who are still alive and languishing in poverty,
Yes.
do they deserve some pension too?
Absolutely they do. But I don't blame them. It's because of our lopsided approach to management of sports. You see, most of our sportsmen and women get into a state of fame when they are still fairly young. They need to be nurtured and mentored, guided appropriately. You see, you cannot be involved in sports forever. It will get to an age when now it takes a toll on you and you have to exit, okay? But again, you can also get injury in sports at a very tender age. So
Injuries that will end your career.
yes, 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 absolutely, yeah. So in our planning, we should be thinking of a retirement arrangement for sports persons, yeah? And it starts from the very beginning. Don't wait until a sports person is almost retiring, then you want to tell somebody you need to get into some business or something. It's just like in employment. From the very first day you get an employee in employment, yeah, you should also get involved in the pre-retirement program for this employee. It's the same thing that we should do to our sports persons. How do we prepare them so that they have some business planning skills, yeah? They have some entrepreneurial skills, pre-retirement skills, so that they are able to also effectively, even issues like effective management of finances, yeah? So we need to have some training programs as part of the overall management of sports. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Owalo.
Thank you very much.
That has been Mr. Eliud Owalo, a very well-conversant man in matters strategic management and consulting. We are speaking about how we can improve our sports in the country. Thanks for watching. My name is Eddie Nyadwa.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Our pleasure too.
Good.